welcome to Raconteurs News.
Good evening, it's Tuesday the 12th of April and welcome to Raconteurs News. We've got a great show lined up for you tonight, as usual. And tonight I'm joined by Tony Hurst. Good evening, Tony.
Evening, Andy.
How's it going, mate?
Yeah, pretty good for me. Evening, everyone. Thanks to everyone for joining the chat. It's all good here. Looking forward to the show.
Yeah. Yes, oh my. And tonight, we've got someone whose show we were on a couple of weeks ago, and that's Chuck Ochelli from American Freedom Radio. Good evening, Chuck.
Good evening, fellas. I'm hearing myself a little bit in my own headphones, but we're doing well here on the other side of the pond as best you can at the moment, right? And the name of the show is The Ochelli Effect, by the way. Despite the fact that American Freedom Radio is at this moment that we're speaking currently offline, I'm still doing my work, just so everybody knows. Okay.
Okay, so people can find you at the OchelliEffect.com, yeah?
Well, actually, it's just at Ochelli.com because they wanted to sell me the OchelliEffect.com at a premium, and I don't make any money, so it's impossible. But yes, Ochelli.com, you can find me there. And if you go to American Freedom Radio, there's plenty of archives there as well. Lots of shows. I'm normally doing them 5 nights a week. It's kind of odd for me to have not done a show last night live. I did record one, though, with Brandon Turbeville, who's an excellent journalist. And we discussed the Middle East in depth and what's really going on over there. Lots of different subjects get covered on my show, everything from vaccinations and fluorides to personal freedoms to historical records, et cetera, et cetera. So you never know what you're going to get when you tune into my show. And I never know what I'm going to get when I come on with you guys either, because we don't really make a plan, do we?
No, well, the plan is go with the flow, Chuck, you know. I find that making plans, they usually go awry. So if you less plans to make, less chance they've got of being messed up.
There you go. So what is it that we're going to cover this evening, gentlemen?
Well, I was wondering, when we came on your show, you asked us about what we thought of the American elections, and we've got this kind of EU referendum here, which is kind of something and nothing. A lot of people seem to be absolutely convinced it's going to make a massive difference, but I think we're damned if we do and damned if we don't. The one thing that has cropped up on my radar, which probably be more noticeable for you, is these Panama Papers. There's a great deal of noise made about that, but then you've got to look at who's putting the story out, haven't you? And what's your view on that, Chuck?
Well, not only do you have to look at who's putting the story out, but you also have to look at what's missing from the story. And right away, what I do not see is a lot of people in the U.S. being pointed to when we know full well that they would be the types of individuals involved in this, right? Now, on top of that, let's not forget that the majority of what's been reported thus far is not something that's illegal per se, or against any particular laws. In fact, although it is a system which has allowed individuals to launder money, it's allowed individuals to hide their wealth, it's allowed individuals to hide their connections between people, and we know this. This has gone on for a long time in a lot of places. You first of all must take a step back and think to yourselves, listen, we actually haven't gotten the majority of the release in public hands yet, have we? Something like 11 million documents, if you want to think about it that way. And then what is it, 7 terabytes of information? Is this one of the reports I read? I've read anything from 3 to 7 terabytes of information, which is rather massive. Yeah. Okay. Even if all of that had been dumped into the public's hands at this point, we would not have had time to adequately analyze it, I guarantee you, first of all. So, with that in mind, we think about why is it that the mainstream has focused on certain individuals? Well, it appears to me as though if you take a look at Vladimir Putin, who is named, although not directly responsible for the actions being revealed in these papers, you do see that there is the need to sort of demonize him. There is a need to identify the already dirty assets of the Saudis, the already dirtied up assets of various others in the Middle East who have questionable motives, shall we say. But again, strikingly absent from the equation is what? The Israelis. I always find it suspect when you're dealing with things on an international stage, you're looking at the Middle East and nobody mentions Israel. That is an immediate red flag to me anyway. But back to it. You have individuals who have either been problematic or who have been in opposition to the U.S./Israeli/NATO agenda in one way or another, and that's the only people who have been spotlighted so far. Doesn't that raise a suspicion for you guys?
I'm always suspicious about everything that I hear out there in the mainstream. Yeah, and you're right about the Israel and the amount of data. I mean, that amount of data in music would take you years to listen to on your own. Years and years. So in files, that must be huge quantity. So, yeah, it makes me suspicious. The old damn lot does. But I'm quite happy about the fact that at least some of this is coming out, and because the mainstream, when it gets there, one thing that it does do when a little bit gets there, it does get quite a lot of people into it, because as we know, there's a lot of people listening to that stuff. But the reasons and the motives behind those that are letting out this sort of information, well, they're always murky and seldom what you'd think just on the off.
Well, right. And immediately, who actually pays a real-world price for this information dump? Well, you have whatever it is his title is in Iceland. Now, people might say, well, Iceland, who cares? You know, in a lot of places, that's what they say. But if memory serves me correctly, is this not also the same nation state that turned around and pretty much denied the bankers their stranglehold on their nation not too long ago? Isn't it fascinating that an individual who's involved in that is immediately kind of dirtied up in one way or another based on this information dump, which I say again, you and I and anybody listening to this right now has not had the opportunity to really examine all of it, even if it had been fully released, which it has not. So we have a tremendous amount of spin being put on something that has only been, in very small part, leaked to the world. So, yes, there are many, many suspicions, and of course the motives could be many. It's always murky when you're looking at mainstream information releases, let's just call them, and I'm holding up air quotes. It is one of those things that is always suspicious, yes, but for me, it's not only what is present in the information already released, but what is entirely absent that gives me pause. So I'm not sure, ladies and gentlemen, if we're not looking at a bit of a justifiable but yet very, very targeted use of propaganda to try and whip up sentiment against a particular group of people that maybe weren't necessarily playing ball militarily, et cetera, who wants to be dirtied up by any sort of appearance of scandal, whether there is true illegality or there have been serious violations of trust in reality or not. Nobody wants to be part of the storm of controversy, now do they?
Probably not. I mean, I don't even know where to go with it, to be honest with you. The whole thing really kind of, it just ties into so many other things in the same way, isn't it? You know, there's a massive distraction going on here, I would imagine. There's a bit of throwing people to the wolves going on, like you're suggesting there, and there's probably a lot more going on besides. It's going to take a while to get to. But there's something else here, that the way the hackers got into that system was through a vulnerability in an outdated plugin, and just to help people out there. A lot of people use WordPress, I know, especially in the business that we're in, we do ourselves. It came through a WordPress plugin that was not updated, and that was a Slider Revolution plugin, one of the most popular plugins out there. So if you're running a WordPress site, this goes to show how important it is to keep it updated. Make sure you update them plugins and that. I know that was a little bit off track there, but I think it's important because, like I say, there's a lot of people out there doing what we're doing and using WordPress, and this is what can happen to you if you don't keep your sites up to date.
Oh, absolutely, Tony. Once a day, and I don't even necessarily understand this stuff well enough to speak about it intelligently, but I do know this. At least once a day, if you're operating on that particular platform, you better update your plugins and whatever else comes your way. Don't ignore those notices. They are there for a reason. Now, that being said, it seems to me as though there's a backdoor built into everything. Who knows? Maybe that's just my suspicious mind. But WordPress in particular, yeah, I've had no troubles with it. But then again, I'm on it at least once a day, making sure that no updates are left behind.
Yep.
So I agree with you there.
Yeah, I run security plugins and that sweep for updates 24/7 and email me notifications when they're needed. Because again, what happens here, once a vulnerability has been discovered in a plugin, then it goes up onto a database online that's accessible to everyone, including all the hackers. So that's why they actually know how to exploit that vulnerability as soon as it's been discovered. So you need to keep up with the Joneses and get your stuff updated.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're a little more sophisticated than me. I continuously manually go and check. But email notifications, whatever it is, don't ignore them if you're working with WordPress. That's for sure.
Andy?
Yeah, so what's going on your side of the pond that's particularly sparked your interest lately, Chuck?
Well, I got to tell you, I took a little bit of time recently to detach from the national politic, if you will, because it just became so repetitive and so redundant, actually. It's pretty much, at a point where people want to talk about the presidential campaign, sure. They might want to talk about their local races, things like that. But nobody's really talking about what matters, in my estimation, which is changing the hearts and minds of people and actually getting them to be aware of the entire situation. The political realm is something that I think anybody who's going to remain a healthy person is going to have to detach from every now and then. So I've taken my time recently to shut it off, to be honest with you. As much as I like to cover it and as much as I like to keep people informed about these sorts of things, every once in a while for my own personal health, I got to shut it off. And, the same thing holds true with any sort of research. I think every once in a while you need to take a break. And that's kind of what I'm in the process of doing, take a little bit of time. And if you can find a patch of grass somewhere, depending on where you live, stick your feet in that, take a look up at the sky and grab a couple of breaths of fresh air every now and then. So this is my time of year to detach from the computer screen a little bit. So you might notice I'm a little more relaxed than I usually am when I'm on the air lately, and that's probably why.
Yeah, that's nice. We've got the spring coming here, and I expect to do some of the same. I'm going to do my best to get out and get some of that fresh air and get me feet out of a pair of shoes and actually touching the grass and the ground and, just get into a bit of something different. And I recommend anyone that's been stuck in there on them computers, if you can get out, do the same. Make the most of the sun while it's here and whatever, and get away from it all. It's amazing when you get out in the countryside and that, or on a beach or something. You can be a million miles away, can't you, from all this stuff that we deal with every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even deep political research, things like that. I mean, I've spent years at a time going through different issues, anything from different assassinations to the mind control programs to, I can't tell you the countless hours I've spent researching various topics. And every once in a while, you need to take a moment and detach. Just that simple. You have to detach and get yourself away. Plus, to be honest with you, if you can find a spot where there aren't a bunch of electromagnetic fields dominating everything, it's always good to take that sort of a breather as well. Recently on my show, I talked to Larry Woods about this particular issue, and we talked about the energetic nature of the world, and how there is a great deal of technology to be rediscovered because ancient civilizations had a greater grasp of certain things than we do now. People think of the Ankh as a spiritual symbol, but no, it's actually part of a battery. Things like that. Trying to be more in line with the frequencies of the universe, if you will, on a daily basis is definitely a way to become a lot more healthy psychologically, emotionally, and dare I say it, spiritually, which is something that I'm taking time to get myself in touch with as well.
Definitely spiritual to me. There's nothing like it for the soul, if you like. I don't like any of them words. None of us do, but you got to use something, and we all kind of got an idea of what I mean. So there you go. But there's nothing better for me than to get out there into nature and it just joins you up with things in a different perspective, much different. So yeah, good luck with your rest. I hope that works out for you. You was talking on a show a couple of weeks ago. I was listening to one of your pods, which can be found on AmericanFreedomRadio.com underneath the archives. Is it archives at the top? I think it was. The Ochelli Effect is the top one on there, and down there that list in 2016. I'm going to chuck a link for it in the chat box to people. You had Daniel on, what was it? Daniel Lewis Crumpton. This is a fella I think that you might well be spending a bit of time with at the minute. And Daniel was a pretty interesting fella. First time I'd heard him talk. And then you had Santos Bonacci on there. And Santos seems to have changed his tune a little bit, or quite a lot actually, which was quite nice to hear after some of the recent stuff. But what was I getting back to? Daniel, I was going somewhere with this waffle before I lost the track. I don't know.
Well, if you want me to pick it up, I will. What happened was I'm friendly with Daniel Lewis Crumpton, who's an author and also a blogger. He writes for a website called zeninthecar.com, which I'm also associated with, and I do work with Daniel, that's for sure. He also authored a book called Then Came the Flood, which is an interesting sort of spiritual journey. If you read fiction in the way that I do, you can find a lot of truth in what they call fiction quite often. Anyway, now Daniel is an interesting guy, that's for sure. He's been a political activist and all that. But when this recent sort of a strife developed between Santos Bonacci and Max Egan, most specifically, over the issue apparently of the flat Earth argument, which I have said several times, by the way, that I don't agree that the Earth is flat, friends. But I do say that their entire argument that we've been lied to our whole lives, and it's very possible that things like this could have been misrepresented, I also find that valid. However, these two guys were kind of going at it apparently, and it had said some pretty vicious things between each other. And Santos wanted to come on and publicly basically say that, that first of all, he had kind of lost his mind there for a bit and had been wrong in what he was doing. And I thought an act of contrition like that was definitely worth my airtime, and Daniel very much looks to Santos, his concepts of syncretism and things like this between various religious dogmatic constructs. And that is quite enlightening if you examine it. And I like Santos for that sort of work. I'm not extremely friendly with him, but I've taken a look at his work in the past. Also, I happen to appreciate Max Egan quite a bit. I think he's done remarkable work on the issue of Palestine, especially. These are the highlights I'm giving you, folks, but there's a lot more to both of those gentlemen out there, and all you have to do is, search YouTube if you like, where, everybody and their mother has a channel, so go right ahead and take a look at YouTube, and you'll find out all about their work if you've never heard of it before. But these two gentlemen were kind of going at it, and I guess Vinny Eastwood had Max Egan on the day before, I guess, and I guess they were kind of in the heat of the moment there, but it seems to me as though after his appearance on my show, they've kind of I hear through the grapevine they've had a private conversation and have buried the hatchet, so to speak, between the two of them. And I would much rather see people that are working toward enlightening others working together, whether they agree or not. I could tell that there are probably many things that if we really examine them closely, Tony, Andy, myself, I bet you we can find points where we can disagree with one another about how we interpret either the current situation, historical realities, or even that which you would consider scientific knowledge. We may find a great many roads of disagreement, but I think it's a whole lot more valid and a whole lot more worthy of an exercise for us to take the time to find ways to agree, ways to work together, and ways to push forward so that we are not fighting amongst ourselves while those who seek to keep us oppressed and suppressed at all times are having their job done for them when we're at each other's throats. And that is a general theme that I carry at all times. I would much rather find a way to agree with someone and to push things forward and to impart people with new ways of looking at things, new pieces of knowledge, things that they may not have considered, or things that they may have considered at one point or another to be specious in one way or another. Maybe they require further examination. So I consider that the greater revolution is contained in the word evolution. I believe that as we evolve as individuals, we will evolve collectively, and this is the thing that really will frighten those who really seek to do us harm on all levels. And I think that is what I try to encourage when I do stuff like that. So a big, long answer, and again, Santos, interesting guy. Kind of lost me when he started talking about drinking my own urine, but it is one of those things that I guess I maybe should consider. I don't know, but sort of loses me there. Perhaps I'll re-examine it some more and find that he's correct about that. But I thought it was actually a very good thing that he came on and just sort of admitted his own error in striking up an emotional reaction to somebody that is really working for the greater good, as Max is doing, and as he is doing himself. That's how I see it.
Well, thanks for that. I really enjoyed listening to the pod. I think it was one of the best shows that I've actually heard on the subject, and I agree with everything that you were saying and Daniel. I think Andy would probably be in the same boat as well, and I know he hadn't had a chance to listen to it all yet. But I thought you handled it really well, and I'm with you 100% on, is it flat or is it round? I don't know, and I don't really care. I can't prove it to myself one way or another. I'm not even inclined to try. But what I don't want to do is fall out with people because I'm too busy doing other things to be concerned about that. But even that's become quite hard, or even impossible in some circumstances to do. We don't seem to be able to ignore it. People want us to take sides one way or the other, and it's not good when all that stuff's going on. So it's nice to know that they're going to get their stuff sorted out and just get on with giving out their information, which is, we should have the information available for people to make their own minds up, because you was talking about the revolution, and I've been saying for a little while now, I've not really been into this truthing business for a long while. I'm learning still a lot, but one thing that I picked up quite early on was the revolution that we need is a revolution in thinking. We really do. So I think that goes along the lines of what you were saying there. But I think Daniel, in the first part of that show, I think it was only a few minutes into the show, he read out his post on this, and I did actually clip that bit out, but for some reason the recording I sent to Andy's not working. I was going to ask if we could play it, so anyway, people will have to go and listen to it for themselves, but on the whole pod, hopefully. But I thought he'd done a really brilliant job in that post of summing it up. That was everything that I've been thinking for a while, summed up in a way that I'm not capable of doing it. So I recommend people listen to that.
Well, right, and Daniel is a writer, so I mean that's his forte, to put things together in such a way. I'm more of a spoken word person. I can, generate ideas and gift people with something, with the spoken word. Some people are more gifted with the written word, and again, I think it is a whole lot more a productive activity to try and enlighten or give someone the gift of a new way of thinking, even if it's one person at a time. I would much rather invest my energy in that than arguing with somebody about whether we went to the moon in 1969 or whether Kennedy was killed by his wife, or God knows whatever other thing is out there that people argue about. Did anybody really die at a particular mass casualty event? All of these things. I would much rather encourage people to examine things for themselves and to access information that is available, and to take a look at the reality around them a lot more carefully, and with what we call critical thought processes. Okay, a lot sooner. I would much rather reach one person at a time doing that than engaging in arguing with anyone, over any issue.
Yeah, this whole argument in the air commas truth movement, it's so counterproductive, Chuck. I see it all the time, every day. Whenever I go on social media, there's one person calling another person because they don't agree with them, and rather just saying, well, we don't agree on that, let's see what we can work together on, they spend days and days and days trying to destroy the other person's life. Oh, what the hell's that all about? You're doing the job of the other side, surely, aren't you?
Precisely, right. And that's the amazing thing. I get called names on occasion because I won't wrap myself around somebody's particular theoretical belief system. I say this all the time, not very popular, but I say it all the time. If all you want to do is come down to the same solution all the time, then you will. If that's what you insist upon, you will find it. Okay. But you're right. It's much better to take a look at any issue. Let's throw the 9/11 issue out there. If we can agree that we were lied to about it, if we can agree that what we have been shown over the years is not the truth, and that we should be demanding it, because what it did is cause the United States in particular to become involved in trillions and trillions of dollars worth of murdering other people unjustly. If we can just agree on that particular point, then we might actually accomplish something. Now, if you want to sit here and argue as to whether it was some great space weapon, or if it was all just a Jewish plot, or if it didn't actually happen and no one died at all, and you want to go through these arguments, which are extremely diverse, and that's what you want to engage in all the time, well, you know what? That's going to take a lot of time. That's going to take a lot of energy. And have we gotten an answer to anything by doing so? That is my question. And I say all the time that, especially people that look at the 9/11 research community, they should really look back to the JFK research community and take a look at the various forms of infighting that have done nothing but stymie the quest for the truth, as opposed to working toward it. Okay, that is your template, folks, if you want to follow it. There is more than half a century of argument, mistrust, individuals infiltrating, disinformation being purposely injected into the situation. Meanwhile, no one ever asking for a solution. Okay, and how do I know that? Because I spent 20 years doing it. All right, and I may be a slow learner, but once I've got the lesson, I assure you I've got it. And I would love to save people that kind of trouble. So, yes, absolutely. Counterproductive is the best word I can come up with for arguing about all of these issues.
Well, it's a good job we've got nothing to argue about tonight then, because so far I'm in agreement with everything that you said there and all of that. But I think people, 9/11 and that comes up a lot, but deliberate deliberately, I think more than one thing happened to myself there that day. I know we're going right into what we say you don't need to bother to doing, but I do like to say this every now and then when I get the opportunity. I think they did more than one thing that day, and that's why the division's there. I think the Judy Wood people and the architects and engineers are probably both right, and I think something else happened as well, and I think that was all quite deliberate in order to get us doing all the things that we've ended up doing on that road for over a decade. It's a massive distraction. It's quite obvious. You said, did any questions get or did we get any answers? We did actually find out. We got confirmation that we weren't told the truth. I think we've had plenty of that. So, sort of. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and again, you can say that we got that far in the JFK research community, where the majority of the public understands now that that the official line was incorrect. That we've been able to get that far, but did it actually accomplish anything more than that? Does it have to take a half a century to get that far? I hope not. You know, it's only a decade and a half now since 9/11. Not quite, but almost. And I hope that that in quick fashion, people will accelerate their ability to stop participating in the infighting, which I do think is purposely constructed, as you alluded to there. I think that this is part of the purpose of having these debates in a lot of cases. This is part of the purpose as to why individuals will come in and bring information that is clearly, false. I think that this is all part of the same scheme, and it's just meant to keep us going in circles while not demanding that something be done about what this spawned. You know, very much the same in America with the Kennedy assassination. We never dealt with what it actually meant, and that is what the big problem is. You know, it means that there were criminals who brought us into things like the Vietnam War. After that, there were criminals who further assassinated and decapitated other social movements in this country. Many people had to die because we were distracted. And the same thing prevails with 9/11. There are too many people that have come back in body bags to various Western nations, and there are certainly a lot of people in the Middle East who have died unnecessarily, and I think that somebody needs to answer for that. And nobody is getting around to that question being answered as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the problem. What so many people don't seem to realise is that if you're going to perpetrate such a massive event, you're also going to put out cover stories. And you're not going to put out one cover story. You're going to have cover story A, B, C, D, E, maybe even down to Z, all lined up, ready to go, so that if one story somebody doesn't like, they can choose another one. So that it just creates total confusion. And it does create that pointless argument of how did it happen, rather than, hang on, there's something wrong here, we need to get this sorted out.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. And like I said, at the end of the day, you know, the truth is, yeah, okay, there were 3,000 people that were lost on 9/11. There was, you know, the singular wound issued to the country when Kennedy was killed. But the resulting actions that grew from those two events, if you think about it, I mean, there's a bit of synergy here. There were wars that we engaged in as a nation that affected people globally. Okay, there is the of course, both of them also have a drug trafficking aspect to them. You know, there's plenty of parallels here. You know, heroin being propagated by both events worldwide. You know, we now have the worldwide cheap heroin distribution system in full effect once again, just like we did during the Vietnam War. Well, why? There was a golden triangle right there, which was a real nice place to cultivate this stuff. And guess what? When we went into Afghanistan, our Northern Alliance allies happened to be the people that funded themselves with exactly that kind of bumper crop. And once we removed the Taliban, guess what? Our friends in Afghanistan became, once again, the worldwide distribution hub for heroin across the planet. Now, some people might think, okay, now he's making some conspiracy theory leaps, but there's no leap to be had here. This is part of the reality and something that needs to be understood as well, I think.
There's a definite reality about the drug dealing. I mean, that we can trace that back for a long way, and it's quite easy to find out for yourself the realities of all of that. It seems that the world's biggest drug dealers are actually those that are having the war on drugs. That's another thing we could have an whole show about, eh?
Oh, yeah, anytime. I had the privilege to speak to Sally Castillo, who was a whistleblower, a former DEA agent, who discovered while he was attempting to fight the so-called war on drugs, which was declared, by President Richard M. Nixon, he discovers that it's not the war on drugs, it's the war of drugs. And guess what? Those that are supposed to be fighting it are actually winning it by distributing and being part of the problem as opposed to part of the solution. He saw it firsthand. This is a guy who shook hands with George H.W. Bush. This is a guy who dealt with Ollie North directly during Iran-Contra. And yes, I'm talking about the days when cocaine was a particular scourge, at least on the streets here in America. I don't know about it worldwide, but I've got to tell you that the crack cocaine scourge did a hell of a lot of damage domestically here. And it turns out that, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, would be more aptly named the Cocaine Importation Agency if you take a look at their actions during that time. And what do they do with this money? What do they do with all of this industry? Well, they turn around and they do weapons deals and things like that off the books. And hello, Iran-Contra deal. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, just go ahead and do a search engine on that particular issue, and you'll see what I mean. It's one of these things that's come into play at all times. I think that just about every war that I can study in 20th century history has a drug basis to it. But it's not all drug wars. It's also about population control. It's also about political control. It's also about the ability to fund both sides so that you can profit no matter who wins, no matter who loses. And at the end of the day, it's we the people at the bottom of the food chain that wind up suffering for every last bit of it. So how do you put a stop to this? I have a hard time giving you the quick solution. But I say that the more that we personally disengage from the system, the less it will have to feed on. So that is the type of solutions I look for when it comes to this kind of thing, And firstly, I would say also that I would never encourage, ask, or even begin to support the idea of anyone that I care about joining any military agency at any point in time. That didn't used to be the case in my life, but you know what? Like I said, it takes me a while to learn, but I do learn my lessons. Because really, truthfully, you become nothing but cannon fodder when you put on one of those uniforms, and you're not fighting a war to defend your fellow citizens. You're usually fighting for the profit of others that you will never, ever meet, you will never, ever see, and at the end of the day, the banks collect all the money, no matter how much you bled or how many times your family gets to die. That's really the reality of the situation. So that's one way in which we can begin decoupling from it. But there are many different ways to stop feeding the system, and I'm constantly examining those as well, as I'm pretty sure you guys are too.
Mm-hmm. Got an interesting question for you here, Chuck, from Susie in the chat room, and I suppose is one we should all be asking ourselves, and that is, who's capable of taking out the world's puppeteers? Any ideas?
Well, the long answer to that is all of us are.
Mm-hmm.
If we are no longer dependent upon the various things, not just the drugs, but if we're no longer dependent upon the industries, which really are vampiric in their personality, if we stop feeding them, if we stop giving our labor and our money when we have it, no matter what it is, whether it's printed by the government or not, if we take away our labors and our treasures from those things which are harmful to us, I believe if we could cause that to happen on a massive enough scale, the machinery would collapse of its own weight. That's sort of the long-winded answer to that one. But I'm always looking for different solutions. So, by all means, anybody who has better ones, let me know. What do you guys think?
Withdraw, consent, and support. We are the problem, and we are the solution.
Yes, sir.
I'm just backing up what you're saying again, Chuck. We've got to withdraw support from everything that's working against us. And I know it's easy for me to sit here and say, and I'm a bit of an hypocrite really, because I ain't managed to do all of it, because you get the fear factor comes striking in, which is losing your home and all the rest of it that can go with withdrawing support from certain things. So I see the answer, but I don't see it being, too many individuals doing this little bit here and there, not going to do it, which is why we're here doing these shows and often repeating ourselves quite painfully with some of these bits, because we do need more people to get involved in it, to actually start doing this, to make the effect, to have an effect on the system, rather than the system at the minute. It seems to deal with people in different ways. It's a bit of a fruit machine when you go up against it as to what will happen to you, but most people don't want to take the chance on it being the worst of the prospects, especially when they've got homes and families to consider. So I'm a little bit sort of like, am I encouraging people to do this? Well, yes I am, but I'm encouraging them to do it en masse and in the right circumstances. It takes the right sort of people to withdraw from certain things. Your tax system, we know it's voluntary for private persons, so you can withdraw from that, but you'd need to do your own work, and you'd need to know how to handle yourself in a court or with whatever might come your way. You'd need to bear in mind, other people that you're responsible for and what might happen to them and your property and all sorts of other things. But there's others out there that are in a position to withhold their funds, and for council tax that we have to pay here, and taxes and other sorts of things that you could withdraw from. So I see that as a possible way forward, but only when there's enough people that actually understand what our problem is, who we're fighting, and how we're going to defeat it and prevent that from happening again, which I think we're probably, I don't know, we're getting closer to all the time, but I don't know that we're close enough yet.
No, you're right, and it's very tough to extract yourself entirely from the system, and nobody who is sane will tell you to do it all at once. That's for sure. But it could be the smallest of things. You could stop, paying the local, you see in America, the Walmarts, right? Stop feeding them. Stop spending your money there, and those big giant corporations which eat up small local businesses won't be able to survive. Okay, it's just that simple. I mean, if you do things like that, if you decide that you'll only purchase your food at places where it's actual food, if you'll buy from individuals that are manufacturing things with materials that you would agree with, et cetera, et cetera. All you have to do is begin to adjust yourselves a little bit. And I mean, look, I'm paying the price for some of what I've done personally at this point in time. I mean, I'm living separate from my family. I'm on my own. I'm broke. I'm staying under somebody else's roof. That's for sure. And this is the kind of thing that happens. I even had a job which could have been given to me in regular terrestrial radio. I think what happened, and I'm not entirely sure, I think what happened is they were about ready to give me that job, and then denied it to me without explanation. But I think what happens is they did a little bit of a Google search on me and probably found out that I wasn't necessarily the most mainstream easy guy as far as the way I look at the system. And I really do believe that that's why I was denied that particular piece of work, et cetera, et cetera. And, so what do I have to do? Well, now I have to discover a way to do this on my own. We live in a remarkable time where the options seem to be many. But in truth, for those that are afraid that if they even begin to peel themselves away from the system in the smallest way, that they're going to lose everything, let me just impart you with this idea. If you don't begin to extract yourself in some ways, you are guaranteeing that eventually that which you seek to protect will also be destroyed. Because no one who is part of that greater machinery, no matter what it is, whether it's the pharmaceutical industrial complex, military industrial complex, prison industrial complex, the political tyrannical systems which exist all throughout this planet, it does not matter. I assure you this much. None of them takes a moment to give a damn about you, your family, or your well-being in truth. So unless you begin doing that, and you begin at the very least not encouraging and not feeding those who are trying to destroy you, if you don't do that, then you have guaranteed that eventually that will no longer be viable at all.
That kind of ties in with what Lee's saying in the chat room. He's saying first point of call is to remove yourself from banking with any of the top 5 or 6 commercial banks if you're still supporting them. Tony's comment is geared to those peeps. And then Ken is also saying, right on, Lee, take control of the money. Sorry to keep banging on about it, but it is the solution. And then Lee says, starve the system as the system is willing to starve us. Because they certainly seem keen on doing that, don't they?
Well, and that's true. That's true. The greater banking structures, I don't have a bank account any longer. I don't participate in banking very much. I mean, I do have a PayPal account. That's as far as I'll interject myself into the system any longer. But that's only so people can reach me, and help me if they wish to. But other than that, I have extracted all of any sort of business which I could do with those greater banking structures away from it. So any labor, anything I collect, I choose where it goes, and it's not being handled by the greater money laundering industries out there. Like the Bank of Saudi Arabia, the Bank of America, things like that. That was the last straw as far as I was concerned when I saw exactly how that particular entity behaved. And now as I speak, no bank account, no connection to the greater banking industry, with the exception of the PayPal account, which I don't know. I question that on occasion too, but what can you do? You have to exist a little bit in the system. In order to keep going with what it is we're doing.
Yeah, we're all in the same boat with things like that. I mean, PayPal itself, it's so useful and handy, but on the other side of that coin, it's extremely intrusive, and it's been known to cause an awful lot of people and businesses some serious problems whenever it wants to shut down your account for whatever reason. It seems to do that. And it can leave people a bit high and dry, and without funds. You might want to look into that. What was the other bit I was going to add to that? There was going to be, we're guided, we're herded like sheep into using certain things and given very few options, and then your life is made that much more difficult without taking those options. And I could lead us off here into another whole world with the operating systems, the way they're changing on our devices and that, and the amount of backdoor software that we've now got, and the lack of privacy, even with our own work, and that it goes into another massive area. As you know, everything's connected, and we can keep spreading this conversation right out on the strength of that. But we're guided into these systems that aren't necessarily for our benefit. They're like honeypots, aren't they? They make our lives lovely and rosy. And you feel that you've got to have it, or in some cases, depending on what work you do, online especially, you do have to have it. If you're going to compete and be able to communicate with your clients and customers, you've got to use an awful lot of bits of software that probably ain't going to be doing you any favours down the line. So we've got this massive like moral dilemma, and your business responsibilities, and then your social life and all that. It's all getting mixed up into this muddy, murky field that's really hard to avoid in a way that doesn't actually cause you an incredible amount of aggravation. And we get that with all sorts of things. See that?
Well, yeah, right. The surrogate reality has really absolutely conquered the real. You know, people are quite a bit engaged, and this goes back to the original point I made about detaching every now and then. You know, they are so heavily engaged in the surrogate reality. You know, they have an argument on Facebook. It ruins the rest of their day. You know, this kind of thing. They're so invested in things that really are nothing more than ones and zeros in a database somewhere, that they forget to have their own lives. You know, they don't bother to look up from their cell phones to see the chemtrails over their heads. They don't bother to engage in conversations with people because they're texting them and posting them and liking them and reacting to them and so on and so forth. And how many Twitter followers do you have? You know, this is again one of those very, very counterproductive things that has been put into place, which in and of itself, it is a technology. Therefore, it's a double-edged sword at all times. It can cut both ways. We can reach people around the world and enlighten them with brand new ideas, or we can send them to play Candy Crush if we like, Tony. I mean, it's just that simple. So it's got to do a lot more with the intent of the individuals who are engaged with it than anything else. But at the same time, no matter what your intent is, don't become so fully engrossed in the matrix that you forget to breathe, that you forget to have real relationships, that you forget to know the people who live around you. How about that for a concept? Isn't that strange at this point in time, right? That, to me, is also one of the greater solutions. Don't become so engaged in that which is surrogate reality that you forget to enjoy the reality which is around you at all times.
Yeah.
That's a good thought.
Go on, Andy.
Yeah, sorry. Got a question here from Ken, and it might, on the face of it, sound a bit antagonistic, Chuck, but it's not. I'm sure it's not meant to be. I spent the last 3 days at Ken's house, and he's a lovely guy. But he wants us to ask you, how do Americans feel about being ruled by the City of London, / Vatican, and Switzerland, land of the free?
Well, that is a funny question. I'll tell you why it's a funny question to me. They don't recognize that is the case. Recently, when I was talking to someone about what went on in a high school classroom, and some of the kids started to ask, did we actually win the Revolutionary War in this country, which is what we call the conflict when we were decoupling ourselves from the English crown, funny, allegedly. When we were doing that, allegedly, that particular event, they asked, did we actually win that war? I felt good about that, but at the same time, I understand that the majority of Americans have no clue that the City of London is a different thing, than London. They have no clue that the Vatican wields power all over the planet. Some of them have gotten to a point to believe that the State of Israel rules the planet, and maybe that it is all a Zionist plot, and that is as far as they will go. But they've often forgotten about our friends at Vatican City there, which I think is a huge mistake, and is one of those things that I'm constantly trying to alert people to. You put the triad, if you will, of the District of Semiramis, the District of Columbia in Washington, the alleged City of the Vatican there, in Italy, and the City of London together, and you have a triad of power which has exerted its influence for centuries and centuries, long before we had the ability to talk to each other across the planet like we do now. Believe me, that influence was felt worldwide. And excellent point by Ken. Thank you for that. I wish I could find many, many ways to enlighten more Americans about that particular threat, Ken. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Chuck. There's an interesting statement here from Mithrin, who's a former policeman. And Mithrin says, I was a Bobby, that's the cop for the American listeners, in a large metropolitan force. 2.7 million people, 8,000 Bobbies. Divided by 5 shifts, every Bobby is policing about 1,600 people. The system ain't that strong. And I think we need to remember that. I mean, we've all seen the scene from the movie The Warriors, when they're talking about how many of you are here in the park and how many cops there are in the city. And really, the numbers are in our favour, aren't they?
Oh, you like that movie?
I particularly like that clip, yeah.
No, I do love that. Cyrus says, take a look at the numbers, and we outnumber them, and can you dig it?
Mm.
I do love that scene. It is true, but here's the thing. At this point in time, see, Bobbies to me, in my mind, maybe I'm wrong, but they don't have weapons, really. They are not armed extremely well, or at least they didn't used to be. I don't know how they are now. But policemen in America now have tanks, now have assault weapons, now are tactically trained. They have body armor. I don't know what it looks like over there, but they look a whole lot more like Blackwater forces than they do cops half the time now. And we would call them police or cops or whatever. Over here, they used to only have one revolver on their side, and that was it. But nowadays, they're extremely heavily armed. They are given pseudo-military training, and the majority of them are former military here. And it is not the same game. It has evolved in a very negative direction in this country. I don't know what it looks like over there. I tell you honestly. I mean, I don't judge based on some of the films I see that is the prevailing atmosphere over there. But over here, we have even small towns with armored vehicles and tanks, literally tanks. Okay, AMRAPs, all this kind of stuff. And it's a whole different game now. What you saw during the riots and the civil unrest that took place as a result of police shootings, I'm sure that some of that video made it over there over the past couple of years.
Yeah, I've seen lots of it.
Yeah, this was not an unusual situation. Your small town police departments now have these armored vehicles, have these tactically trained troops to do what they do. And it's a wholly different situation. I literally asked on a radio show, I don't know, a year and a half ago, my entire statement repeated over and over again is, have we actually reached the time that Judge Dredd is going to emerge? Because in the comic book, if you don't know, there's individuals who are given the title of judge, and they are essentially police officers, judges, and executioners. Which are well armed and sent into the mega cities in order to, enforce justice upon people. It seems like we are evolving in a negative way toward that particular archetype in this country, and I find it extremely frightening. I try to personally engage with police officers when I see them, and try and bring them back to remembering that they are also a citizen of the place they're policing, and quite honestly, a lot of these guys are far beyond reach now at this point in time, and it's actually a very precarious situation if you're somebody that wants to do anything publicly that is not entirely in line with the official positions here nowadays.
Yeah, that's you say it's frightening. I find it frightening watching some of what I've seen going on with the American police on the on the YouTube and out and on the TV. It is shocking. And you were saying you don't know what it's like here. Well, we're going that way. As Uniquely was saying here in the chat, the police force began as a service. It was the police service, and now it's known as the police force. And I think there's a lot to be read into that, and it's showing you where we're going. They're paramilitarising it. That's what they look like, paramilitaries. And we're never that far behind America. It seems to me that the Vatican and that used the Americans as a testing ground for the latest diabolical loss of liberty. And the Americans do on the whole seem to suck it all up over the years. They've had it, haven't they? They've just dealt with it, and then it comes this way a bit at a time. We get used to it on our news, and it becomes the norm for us before it actually gets here. And that's kind of what's happening here. We've seen some really disturbing business going on in the police in terms of how they're acting as policy officers, as somebody wrote in there, I think it was Sovereign Man wrote earlier, and they're out there helping bailiffs and performing all sorts of duties that they shouldn't be, and well, they're not duties, they're actually performing illegal acts, and they don't mind who films it now because they're so protected by the court system that they don't think that they can be prosecuted or anything can be done to them for what they're doing. And we're going down the road of privatising as well, privatising our force. So I'm wondering is there any signs of that happening over there in America with them privatising them?
Yeah, in various cities they've become privatized. And there is a huge difference between what we used to call a peace officer and a law enforcement officer, right? These guys are all now law enforcement officers. There is no such thing as an individual who tries to keep the peace. It just seems as though it is geared toward prosecution. It is geared toward snatching up people so that they become entrenched in the system, especially those in economically depressed areas. What happens is, look, you get hauled into court, you get a fine, you can't pay. So you get thrown in jail, and then you don't have a job, and you don't have funds, and you don't have anything. You get re-released, and then you're told you still got to pay the fines. Okay, so now you desperately try and find the money to pay the fines to not go back to jail, and this is the self-perpetuating system that many poor people find themselves in. Thankfully, I have not been recently exposed to this system personally, but I am vulnerable to it because the moment that they grab me up for any reason whatsoever, which is interesting at this point because there have been many justifications for detaining people over recent years here. And all of that coming into play with the idea that once you privatize your police force, right, in quotes, guess what? You remove a lot of civil responsibility from them. It's very much like the privatized troops that wind up going in. This is why I mentioned Blackwater earlier. The mercenary troops who are guns for hire, they don't necessarily have to obey the military code of justice. They're not necessarily under the same scrutiny for war crimes, although, hey, it seems as though we can skirt all those too. But why not just take it out of the equation? And that's the fear I have with these privatized police forces. Towns are broke, states are broke, the country's broke. Interesting, nobody has any money, but yet everybody owes somebody. Anyway, back to it, you'll see the rise of these privatizations during times of economic stress, for sure. And it's all part of the same agenda. Yes, America definitely is the vanguard of all that which is tyrannical. If you see it here, get ready. It's coming to a neighborhood near you. That's the way it works. And it's pretty interesting because even just over the northern border in Canada, they find themselves starting to resist things a little bit ahead of time because they're starting to watch the trends emerging in the States here, and they realize that they are not far behind us every single time. We get the National Defense Authorization Act, and they get C-150 or whatever it is not long afterwards. Of course, after some sort of tragic event occurs that seems to target the government, etc. One of those kind of things. I take you back to the Parliament shooting from, what was that, a year and a half ago maybe? This justifies legislation, just like all of these other events in America wind up justifying legislation, which clamp down on individuals' personal rights, abilities to express themselves, et cetera, so that you are even much more vulnerable to becoming a victim of the greater prison industrial complex, which your local agents now wear badges, claim to be judges, and call themselves officers of the court. And there you are. Welcome to the Orwellian. Those who are meant to be the peace officers are not peaceful. Those who are winning peace prizes are escalating wars. This is the world that we live in, and absolutely nothing is labeled as it should be. So sorry about that little rant, but it's just one of those things that does stick to me every single time this subject comes up.
That's no sweat, Chuck. I've just actually got a message from someone who's listening in Canada, and he said, yes, we've been watching the police very closely, and you're absolutely right there, Chuck. So normally at this time, we play a little music break so we can just grab a drink and freshen up. And if that's okay with you, Chuck, we'll be back in 5 minutes.
Absolutely, gentlemen. Thanks for having me on today so far and putting up with me. And yeah, I could use a little musical interlude, so looking forward to it.
Okay, well, here's a bit of Northern English rock music for you, Chuck. This is The Force with a track called The Snake. welcome back to Raconteurs News, bringing you untwisted, unsweetened news on raconteursnews.com. And welcome back, Tony and Chuck. How you doing, guys?
I'm good, cheers. Chuck back.
Doing all right. I appreciated that musical interlude because I've always been a fan of that type of stuff. I mean, Saxon, Judas Priest. I'm a huge Black Sabbath fan. That's really, they're like the kings of music to me. But I've always loved music with that sort of style. So Iron Maiden, all that kind of stuff. Loved it all my life. So great stuff there.
That's great seeing that.
Yeah, War Pigs is one of my favourite Sabbath tunes to play on the radio. I love the lyric. You know
yeah, loved performing that when I used to cover that when I was a musician quite often. Yeah, absolutely. But all the Black Sabbath stuff is wonderful. Of course, I love the stuff with Ozzy best, but all of it in every incarnation I enjoyed it. So that's a little personal thing with me. But anyway. Do love that kind of music, man. It's great. Thank you.
Yeah, Ken's saying that he did the sound for Saxon and to send you those albums. So you'll be getting them later on, I expect.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Where was we going before that break? I've forgotten where we was. So such a rush was I in to get some other things done there. Where was we going?
Well, let's see. We're discussing the general police state as it prevails in various locations. Exactly how it's evolving. Is there a difference between us and the UK at this point? Probably the UK is behind us a bit, but hot on our heels. Eventually, they'll get to the black uniforms, body armor, and tanks. I'm sure on a daily basis, as opposed to just during special events. I think that's as far as we got. And Canada is also a part of the equation. They're usually watching what's going on just south of them and saying, oh no, I hope this isn't coming our way, but they know it is.
Yep, we did have quite a lot of interesting comments about the police forces and that, how they privatised them here. I think it was Rob Freeman was saying that Devon and Cornwall police, that's two counties in our West Country, were owned by IBM computers, apparently. And then we had another comment, I think it was from my friend, that said that also the Devon and Cornwall police are under councils. So we've got two lots of major conflict of interest going on there, if all that's true. I mean, it needs a bit of research. I mean, I've heard quite a bit about the IBM over the last couple of years. I'm pretty sure that's true. And the other bit, well, I need to look into that a bit further, but I've got no reason to doubt it at the minute. So that sounds pretty incredible. But what's happening to the police within inside these corporations that are owning them is that they're privatising the police out themselves to G4S in some cases, or many cases, like a security type firm, which is means, well, in many cases, minimum wage or something like it. So they're becoming subbed out and devalued, as well as dehumanised, and turned into kind of robotic, uncaring, unsympathetic machines that are going out there doing corporate business rather than protecting the public. And in doing this, they're not even protecting themselves or their own families. And that, you know, this is how far down the road they've got a lot of these people with their neuro-linguistic programming courses that they go on and that. And I think it's quite hard to get into the police nowadays if you've got any sort of compassion from the stuff that I've been looking into. So I find it all rather alarming. It is like they're trying to, or they are building a kind of private army, and they're using taxpayers' money to do it.
Well, yeah, absolutely true. And the other aspect here, and here comes my empathetic nature, is that in a lot of cases here, now I say again, I can only state what's happening in America up close and personal, but the fact is that a lot of the newer generations of police officers who are being recruited are veterans. They are often veterans of these wars, okay? So that means they've already been programmed in a traumatic way. They've already been broken for military purposes. So it absolutely lines right up with the very same agenda you're talking about. And here comes my empathy. I feel terribly for these guys because they have been already dehumanized. They come back here. There really aren't many jobs for them. So they're kind of funneled into law enforcement as a way to continue to make a living once they've, no longer are useful in the battlefield. And these guys suffer from PTSD. They suffer from various results of traumatic experiences. I mean, listen, it's not easy to go into a war zone, and it's not easy to kill people on a daily basis. It's not easy to take actions that are going to lead to the deaths of many others, no matter how much you dehumanize the enemy. On some level, you realize that you have to lay aside some of your humanity in order to participate in this to begin with. And they are the perfect candidates to be recruited for such. And quite often that is exactly who you're confronted by when you're dealing with someone who's been given orders. They've already, taken the human element out of the equation for them and for their ability to relate to their targets, just like they would in the military, because they were already military programmed in a lot of cases. And it's no wonder that we have a rise of police shootings where, regardless of what you may see being reported, there are individuals that are making an effort to get out information that, this is not happening on a weekly or monthly basis in America. There are individuals being shot dead on a daily basis in this country, either being shot dead or being shot and injured by these police officers in either questionable or completely criminal circumstances. And I think that you can't remove from the equation the fact that they have been already traumatized, they have already been programmed, they have already been militarized in their own personal lives in a lot of cases. So I have some sympathy for that, because I don't feel as though if these individuals weren't already abused by the system, they would not act in the way that they do toward their fellow neighbors. Okay, it's just that simple. So that's one aspect of it. The greater corporate agenda, which you also referenced here, this is part of the equation for them. They have a ready-made, traumatized group of individuals that are returning back to civilization from whatever battlefield they've been interjected into, and of course they are ripe for the picking for those that wish to utilize them for these purposes. I don't know what you guys think about that, but that's exactly what I'm seeing as a trend here.
Yeah, we're seeing the police being increasingly militarised over here as well, and that thing that was said about G4S taking over the running of some police forces, they've already taken over the running of our police force, which is Lincolnshire. I know we're a little small rural county, but it does seem to be the thin end of the wedge. And I've seen so many times when police officers turn up at evictions and protests, people saying to them, you won't have your job soon, you'll be working for G4S on minimum wage. And some of the cops look slightly disturbed when they hear that, because perhaps they realise that it, probably quite true. And that's the way it seems to be going.
They're being used, and what you were saying there, Chuck, about the kind of legacy abuse, really, of people, isn't it? They're not really given any options, like you were saying. They come out of the forces and that, and I've seen some real horror stories about what can happen to people once they leave the forces. How little care is given to them in many cases. A lot of them end up homeless and that now, from what I can see. So you could see why they might want, feel the need to go and do one of these jobs and that, and why the other people that are employing them might want these sort of people there, that are totally reliant on that way of life to do their bidding and used to it. So yeah, I see it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing is, listen, and it's understandable, because when you examine the fact that in this country we have, something like 24 men per day taking their own lives, who were former servicemen in one form or another, and you have a significant population of homeless and discarded individuals who were former service people who had served in the military. You can visibly see that in every part of this country. There are tent cities, around abandoned shopping malls and things like this. And very recently, I even had Dean Ryan on my show because he was doing an action there in the streets of Los Angeles to alert people to the fact that there is a tent city being moved around and all that. And he has this idea about these small houses which could be gifted to people so that they have a place to get back on their feet and this kind of thing. And in a lot of cases, the individuals we're talking about here are people that were misguided, but felt as though they went to risk their lives, risk their futures, risk their connection to their families in order to do the right thing. Now, they go in there to allegedly defend the rest of us, they think. And when they come out, what are they greeted with? They're greeted with very little care. They're greeted with being discarded. They're greeted with desperation is what the bottom line is. And, it's very understandable that they would go into one of these industries regardless because, look, if you're going to starve, and your other option is to go into something that might be questionable, I dare say that the majority of us would choose not to starve. Yep. Okay, and that's what seems to be happening a lot. So, yeah, I take your point very strongly.
Yeah, this is a bit more of the sheep herding that I was talking about earlier, and I know a lot of people don't like that term, but for me it sums it up what they're doing. There's shepherds and there's sheep, and most of us have been sheep in one way or another, and I probably still am at this point in my life with some things. You follow things, you get pushed into certain routes. So if you make the circumstances right, the environment right, then you know that you're going to be able to filter a certain amount of people at least into this system, and eventually it's going to go your way. And this is more of that sort of thing where we're offered little choice, and human nature is survival, isn't it? We've got a survival instinct. Now, when people are put into the worst of circumstances, it can bring out the worst in them. And, I really don't like it. I feel for them people, those servicemen and women and that from all over. They've had so much to go through. They've been used and abused and sent out to do the biddings of others, often or near enough always, under an illusion that it was for some other reason. They've been experimented on with all sorts of medicines and vaccines and God knows what sort of shit they've had put inside them. Right. And then they're just left to get on with it, basically, or accept normally pretty low security type jobs, or, now they're getting offered these sort of opportunities. I mean, it's a real nightmare situation for all of us, but especially for those people that get involved in that.
Oh yeah, it's definitely one of those things that I speak to a lot, and again, not a new thing. This has been done by design. It's been done for a very long time, and this has occurred many times more than just now. Unfortunately, we cannot repair the mistakes of yesterday, but we can take things forward and change the equation as we go. So I say, to some people, they honestly take a very harsh view of some of these guys who come back and they have their problems, and some of them do become police officers. This is what I keep encountering personally, actually, is that the majority of these young guys coming up have come out, and they're, say, 26, 27 years old. They haven't had a job, but they were in the military. They did do what they thought was their duty for the rest of their countrymen, and they wind up doing these types of jobs because this is the only way they're going to be able to provide for their families. And I understand that, and I see that even from my own personal point of view, because my father had returned from service in Vietnam. And believe me, if you think there's no treatment for these guys now, there was absolutely none for them in the 1970s. And the shape he was in, quite honestly, and it's a heartbreaking issue for me. It left him with very few options. And at the end of it, the end of the story there is that he'd taken his own life after a couple of years, and many of these guys wind up in exactly that position where they just wish to escape where they are. And, if their options are, hey, look, I can kill myself, or I can go into law enforcement, or I can go and work at a grocery store while I'm not being treated for all my ailments, and maybe I can bag groceries. What do you expect them to do is what my question is. For anybody who takes a harsh view of people that have gone in and participated in service, I don't go with that point of view. Unfortunately, they are being used, just like many other people from many walks of life are being utilized in order to add to the machine. The people that work for different agencies that really crush us financially, that crush us on a spiritual level, that work for some of the media that brainwashes people. A lot of them have come to that particular vocation out of desperation, and have misunderstood when people like me have tried to say, the more that we decouple ourselves from these monsters, the smaller those monsters will be. And that's something that I repeat myself when it comes to it, but it's very, very important. If we don't want them to keep growing in size, we need to stop feeding them. It's very simple, and it's not always easy. Life is not something that I ever understood to be promised to me as easy. So that's what it is. Do what you can when you can with what you have, and try to do something positive on a daily basis. I mean, that's the only thing that I keep repeating. To myself, by the way, not for you guys even listening out there. I mean, I hope that you'll take some of what I've said and expand upon it. But at the same time, it's not a matter that should be decided by me or anybody speaking on this program for what it is you need to do. But I ask you to consider it, because if we all took the time to do that, I think a whole lot of things would collapse of their own weight, because without us feeding them, they don't survive. It's that simple.
Yep, spot on. They don't survive. Right, we've got so much going on in the chat here. It's very busy. People have got lots to say about these police forces and that. Rightfully
yes.
So, well, because it's extremely important to us all. They're supposed to be the middlemen in all of this, and they're serving us. But Uniquely, who does a show on Raconteurs News at the minute, he's broadcasting on here, and we're he gets into the dark side. His show is called The Dark Side of the Room, and he explores things that most people don't get into, and I really enjoy listening to him. But he's saying on here today that they're going to robotise the police force, and long term I can see that as one of the possible options that they might be looking towards, because I've seen some of these robots that they've got available now, and these drones and that, and you could do an awful lot of policing with them. They already do the other side of the world, and the general way that they're bringing up these coppers and that now, policemen, are more and more like robots, and I think we're going to see some real big problems caused by this sort of behaviour. Well, we already are, and obviously there's going to be an outcry when it gets to a certain stage. So we've got a problem and a reaction, and maybe the solution may well be these robotised police devices, whatever they might be. There's an awful lot of ways they can implement policing with technology now.
Yeah, absolutely. It becomes a wholly different equation when you introduce drones, which are already in use, in wide use across the U.S. I don't know, they haven't given us the fully automated policeman yet, and they haven't given us RoboCop either. But They certainly have introduced elements of drones, of different mechanized assets in the police forces, and it's all over the country. Is this a frightening aspect as well? Sure it is. But once again, without our consent, I tell people all the time also that, resolve your issues without calling in the enforcement arms, please. Try to deal with most things without introducing them into the equation in the first place so you don't contract with them. People seem to keep missing that particular message. But this is also true, and it's it's another really, really bizarre kind of thing that's happening here. I don't know what to make of it, honestly, because these things are becoming a whole lot more accessible. It's gone far past the days when you have a robot which can simply diffuse explosives and things like that. And the drones for surveillance are becoming a whole lot more widespread, much as the rest of the surveillance state is as well. And this is something else to be considered. The illusion of privacy should be gone from everyone at this point, especially anybody who's hearing me right now. But it's not. They seem to have gone into a cognitive dissonance regarding these things, and I think it's been normalized, and it's also another rough aspect of it. And I definitely agree with that kind of examination, and I think the first thing that we need to demand here should be that the human element should not be removed from the equation when you're dealing with human conflict. I also don't agree with the idea of mechanizing the military. A lot of people think that might be a good way to save lives, because now you would just have robots being destroyed, But there are many ways. Like I said earlier, all technologies cut both ways. And, I'll be damned if the Terminator universe, and Skynet not being online already, is not coming to fruition right now as we speak, and that is also a really, really dangerous thing, especially considering how far they're advancing with artificial intelligence, most of it being kept from public view as usual. You introduce that into the equation, and how long is it before the machines decide they don't really need us, right? That's another aspect definitely worthy of discussion as well.
Yep. Again, Lee talks about it quite a lot, artificial intelligence, and I really like listening to this, and I'm learning more and more, and the more I see and read about what's going on out there in the world of artificial intelligence, the more it just blows my mind. It's pretty amazing. Some of the claims, some of the stuff you can see for yourself is actually real. You can see it, but some of the claims that are made as to what's really going on out there, pretty mind-blowing stuff. I'm not sure that, again, like you said earlier, the double-edged sword thing, maybe this could be used for good, but I don't really see too many ways of how we're going to benefit in the long term myself. But I'm not sure I'm best equipped to work it out, so I don't know. At the minute, it looks like we're going to have to go with it all. We're all being sucked into it. Again, we're being herded with these operating systems that I was talking about earlier, and we're getting all connected now, and to be part of this through this Windows 10 with your Cortana assistant, and that's all wired up to this supercomputer, and all your information's going into there, and we're making like some hive intelligence type of thing that's again, mind-blowing to me. I don't understand it all fully, but what I do get of it, I get that it could be used for good, but I think most likely it's not going to be, because of those all of this. And what seems to be obvious to me now is that they've got no concern or consideration for us whatsoever, and they're looking at making it worse. So I don't see how it's there to help us.
Absolutely. I agree. And I'll tell you something else. I want to throw this at Andy and see what he's got to say about it. I think very recently, now this is going to sound like a wild theory, but I think that because of the use of the algorithms and because of all the input which has been issued so far, I'm starting to believe that Facebook is either on the verge of or is self-aware in and of itself. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I've heard that kind of concern being voiced. I don't really understand enough about AI, but the whole Google, Facebook, it's all been linked together, and it does concern me that, yeah, it is becoming self-aware. It's increasingly obvious to anyone who uses Facebook that your posts only go to certain selected members of your friend list, and they're basically the ones who are interested in the stuff you're putting out. So it is all heavily monitored and tailored. So nobody who goes on there gets a true picture of what's going on. As far as the self-awareness, I'm not really sure how that works, Chuck.
Well, what do you think, Tony?
I didn't even hear it.
Sorry?
I didn't hear what you said. I was reading something. Really sorry.
Oh, sorry about that. What I was saying is I think that that Facebook in and of itself is either on the verge of or is self-aware at this point.
Okay, sorry.
What do you think of that?
Yeah, I heard all that. It was Andy's response that I didn't hear. I was reading some bits here from Under the Bus on the chat. Welcome to the chat room, mate. What do I think? I think it's quite shocking. It sounds to me like it's evolving itself already. Then, if that's the case, and what's that come from? Just the input of people using it. It's learned from that to be aware of itself and its own purpose, if you like, as it expanding on its purpose. I don't know what they exactly mean by self-aware. How self-aware they think it might have become. I don't know. What are they looking at to make us see? Is there something there that I can look at that says, well, this is how we can see that it's grown, it's manifested itself into something that it weren't programmed to do? I don't know.
Yeah, well, we won't know that unless we talk to the people that actually inputted the initial programs, and will they admit it if it has actually manifested into something other than it was purposed for? I don't know, but it seems to me like it is certainly on the verge of it in one way or another, because the algorithms have gotten about complex enough that it could make rudimentary decisions for itself. That's what it seems like to me, and hey, maybe it's just a crazy theory, but I'll tell you one thing. The idea that we're talking about here, where if you decouple yourself from the greater mechanism, if you remove its power by removing your consent and your participation, will become extremely obvious if we do see these things become publicly known as evolving into something that is self-aware. And Facebook, mind you, although it's a very large platform, is a very small concern. I mean, one could even extrapolate out of that the internet as it stands is a form of artificial intelligence, because there are many different things that are manifest from it now quite automatically that don't require the input of human beings any longer. So if that was your criteria, you could say that the internet itself is actually self-aware. But there is a great deal more to it, Tony. As you said, it's just one of those things that, I don't know, on a gut level, I'm starting to believe. And I just thought maybe since you guys were discussing the mechanized police force and going in that direction, I thought maybe we could discuss that for a moment, that concept. But either way, it's something to consider, and I think something to look out for in the future, for sure.
Yeah, I've got a gut feeling that you might well be right, and I think, yeah, the internet itself, if it's happened to Facebook, it must have happened, surely, on the internet itself, I would have thought. So it's something to look into and look out for, but I don't see too much good to come out of the things that they're doing now. Lee sent me a video a couple of weeks ago about is it the Google supercomputer? I think it was. They'll probably put me right in the chat box there and maybe even post a link up to someone for it. There was someone had an interaction with it, because apparently you can go there on online and talk to it, ask it questions. And the video went on for 20 minutes or so, and it was really quite disturbing, the answers that this lady was getting from that video. She was asking it about how we got here and creation and God and all sorts of things. I recommend people have a watch of it. It's pretty scary stuff, or I thought it was anyway.
Yeah, well, please make sure to pass me that link, because I would want to see it. And if it is what I think you're telling me it is, I think I'll make sure to share that around to others to get them to consider that as well.
Yeah, that's cool, Chuck. We've got might be a slightly tongue-in-cheek question from Mithrin here. He said, how long could AI look at videos of cats before it kills itself?
Yeah, I've considered that kind of stuff too. Between the cats and the baby videos with kids laughing, I don't know what the tolerance level would be for AI. I imagine that would just be sucked into the algorithm to extrapolate the real construct from which one could build a cat. I don't know. That's one of those questions more for a programmer, I guess, than for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Here we go. Here's the video from Lee, I think. Oh, maybe not.
Yeah, that is it. Am I Lucifer? I am Lucifer. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's it.
I'll copy that over for Chuck. There we go.
Yeah, I think you'll find that well interesting. Cheers for that, Lee.
Yeah,
yes, thank you very much.
Yep. Interesting couple of things. Keep hearing about these major events that are supposed to be happening July, August. Again, every year we have our events scheduled, don't we? And we're still here at the minute, so that's good. But I dare say one time soon, or in the not too distant future, that's probably not going to happen for whatever reason. Maybe we'll get hit by a solar flare, a bit of a comet, I don't know. Maybe someone will just knock the grid out with a virus, because we're all linked up into this thing now, and it seems to me that there's probably quite a few ways that it could be taken out and leave us in some some real trouble. I don't know.
Well, yeah, the new dark age, right? That's what a lot of people talk about. Now, what I find remarkable about this time around, not like the 2012 scenario, not like the 2001 scenario, not like the various other, if Obama's elected, the world's going to come to an end scenarios. Unlike any of that, I have found that people from various spiritual disciplines have come together, and individuals who view let's call it the world, in various ways, are all seeming to converge on a particular time period this year, and stating that some sort of great change is going to emerge. Now, this isn't a doomsday scenario. This is a matter of something very big about to happen. And I've talked to people who are mystics of one type or another, individuals who would consider themselves pagans, individuals who would consider themselves Christian mystics, individuals who would consider themselves in touch with indigenous people on this side of the world, and they all seem to point to this one particular time period. Even a man who's kind of out there a bit, and according to most people's estimations, Richard Allen Miller is telling me the very same thing. And there's a guy who takes a look at the universe as if it were holographic. And you got to understand that even he is pointing to this particular time somewhere between June and August of this year, where some sort of great change is going to emerge on this planet. Now, I don't know what to make of it. I reserve judgment. And I must say that it's just really fascinating that people who study astrology, people who study different forms of ritual magic, people who study the Christian mythos, as it were, people who study various ancient texts, seem to all be pointing to this one particular time period. Now, fascinating to me because I do understand the legend of the seventh star, and it is going to occur during this time. And an astrological alignment will occur that mimics that which I had read about many, many years ago during this time. And other astrologers have told me about different formations and this and that coming into this house and whatever else, and it gets very confusing. But I do find it interesting that a lot of people are coming to this conclusion that something very, very big is going to emerge on the planet between June and August. I would say stay tuned and let's see for real if we got something this time, because these prognostications in most cases turn out to be nothing. But I find it interesting that people have, like I said, come from so many different backgrounds to basically give me a bit of a heads up all during the very same time period. Are you guys seeing that too?
Yep, absolutely. That's one of the reasons I thought I'd bring it up here, because I know that you've got, you've had a few shows. The one that you talked about earlier as well, with the fella, what was his name? Oh, I can't bloody think of it now. I'd heard that. Yeah, listen to a few of yours, really enjoying them, Chuck, and you got some good bits coming up there about different events, and I've heard it in lots and lots of different places. And again, I don't make any predictions to anyone. I hear them every year. I find it interesting. People seem to be able to come up with some pretty good evidence for the possibilities of things happening, but time scaling seems to be a particularly difficult thing for people. So I know one thing for sure, that nothing stays the same. I can see through our history and that events have happened on a regular basis here that have changed things dramatically, and we've got evidence of polar shifts and all sorts of things. We know that we play Russian roulette with the sun and solar flares and that. So at some point in time, something's going to change things quite considerably from that aspect. But there's other aspects, isn't there? Like you were saying there, there's all sorts of things that could constitute a major change that could happen. And maybe I was wrong earlier, and we have got enough or near enough people to get to by then to have a massive change in consciousness, if you like, or awareness, and a change of that sort. Or maybe it'll be a change for the worse. Maybe there's not enough, and the jaws and all the new legislations and acts that are being put in place in this country and yours and others, the jaws will close down, and we're going to have a change that will go down the more Orwellian route. I don't know. It's all exciting. I know that. I think we're living in very interesting and exciting times, and I just sort of I don't worry about anything. Patrick was saying in the chat box there earlier something about that we're all at just energy, and don't worry about the doom and gloom because you can't see an end to that. Us being energy, in other words, and I go with that in my life. I don't worry about none of this stuff. I really mean that. I don't worry about it. If someone told me the big planet was going to crash into us tomorrow, I'd still sit here and do much the same as I would have done if I didn't know that it was coming. It's not.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you entirely, Tony. So there, you know what? We are merely, and I hear this said a lot, and I'm not sure who said it first, but it doesn't matter. We are merely a spiritual or energetic beings, and we are having a physical experience at the moment. But the one thing that you can guarantee in life is that all things must and do change. So, that being said, I think that fear is quite a wasted emotion, and I just simply don't want to participate in it. What do you think about that, Andy?
Yeah, well, I had a very interesting conversation with a gentleman at the weekend who I've been wanting to talk to for ages, and somebody's finally managed to link up with him, and I'm hoping we're going to get an interview out of him soon. But he did say to me that people say, you've got to lose the fear. Now, he said that fear actually has its place. Fear protects us from certain dangers, lions, tigers, all these kinds of things. But if we're overcome by fear, then obviously that puts us at a major disadvantage. And I do get the feeling something's about to change. I've been feeling that way for a couple of years now, and I feel we're getting really, really close now. So I'm really excited to see what happens this year. I'm hoping that either it's going to be good for us or we can turn it to our advantage.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you there. The only thing I will say is this, that instinctive reaction is not the same to me as fear. You have instincts which are there, which seem like fear, but they're not. They are for